Hey guys, Darkskeleton here, and today I'm going to talk about deck and playstyle variety inside of Hearthstone, how there's not enough of it, and how I hope that Goblins vs. Gnomes will alleviate that problem. Now, for as long as I can remember, Zoo and Handlock decks have been viable inside of Hearthstone. They're two decks which are almost polar opposites of each other. The Handlocks try to maximize the hand size, stall for the late game, and use their spells to control the board, whereas the Zoo tries to dump their hand on the board, throw everything at their opponent, and abuse the life tap ability to keep going. What's significant about the viability of these two decks is that you never actually know exactly what kind of Warlock you're going to be going up against. Now, Zoo might be a little bit more predominant in the early ranks where I am, that would be anything above rank 10. But as I've seen pro players play, they tend to go up against some more handlocks, but there are good Zoo decks. For instance, Firebat the world champion actually dominated many players inside of the tournament by using a Warlock Zoo deck. Now, when you're playing in a tournament, of course, you can look up the stats on another player to figure out exactly what type of Warlock or what type of Druid they play. But in solo queue and ranked play, it's very hard to quickly identify what they're playing. You can take a good guess by how many cards they choose to mulligan from their hand, but you're never 100% sure if you're going up against a Zoo or a Handlock. It creates a sense of mystery which really changes how you play the game. And then when you throw in weird combinations of cards, it can really throw people off. But I think one of the current problems in the game that is seemingly going to be resolved in Goblins vs. Gnomes, but who can say for absolute sure, is that each class, for the most part, only has one, maybe two decks that are actually all that viable. If you go up against a rogue, you're 90% certain that he is going to be playing Miracle, so you do the same thing against every single rogue. You just save your removal for the Gadget Sand or save your anti-stealth for the Gadget Sand. Do whatever you need to do to stop Gadget Sand, and that's just how you fight a rogue. Now, there used to be a couple different rogue decks like Backspace, which occasionally saw some play because they were good in the current meta. But aside from a very tiny portion of the population, pretty much everyone is playing the same deck if they're really trying to ladder. So as such, the game becomes kinda stale and predictable, and part of the reason that's the case is because there just aren't enough cards in the game right now, which is something they're obviously trying to remedy. Since in the expansion they're adding a whole bunch of different class cards that are very different than what you would have been playing with beforehand. For instance, something like an Ogre Ninja is a card that could actually be pretty good. It's got 6/6 stats for 5 mana, it has the drawback of having a chance to hit a random enemy minion instead of the one you want to attack. But it's a card that could really go into certain decks. However, one of those decks that it would not go into is almost certainly Miracle Rogue. And a lot of the other class cards that they're adding in don't really fit the current decks that people play right now. Which means most likely one of two things is going to happen. A, all the new cards suck, so people will just be running the old cards. I kinda doubt that. I think some of the new cards are actually very good. Or two, some of these new cards are actually going to push new types of decks into viability. Now, ideally, they don't push them over the edge where they just dominate everything that people used to play, and instead get somewhere of a middle ground where they're good enough to compete with older decks like Miracle Rogue, Handlock, Zoo, but not enough to completely overwrite them. Now, if the meta starts to be a lot less specifically defined, then a lot more of the game will be about figuring out exactly what your opponent's playing. I personally find that kind of thing very exciting. I like to see what other people can come up with, and I like to try coming up with certain things myself. Now, I know that most of the decks I come out with are never going to make it to Legend, just because they're not running the absolute best cards that everybody sticks in every single deck. But it's still a lot of fun to play, because your matches end up looking a lot different. Now, speaking on the topic of predictability inside of the game, secrets are, ironically, one of the most predictable things. Each of the secrets classes only really have 3, maybe 4 secrets that are actually viable to play right now. And you know, based on how they play the secret, what their board state is, or the timing of the secret, more or less 90% of the time, what it actually is. Now, sometimes the secret will devastate your opponent, or sometimes they'll play around it to trivialize the effect of the secret, but very rarely are they especially caught off guard by what you just played. And to me personally, that's how I feel about a lot of decks I go up against on the ladder, or in solo queue, or especially in arena even. You just know what's coming a mile away, and so does your opponent. And you know, come to think of it, it's really ironic that that's how it works out in arena. Because in arena, most of your deck is built up of common cards, And there are certain commons which are significantly better than other commons, and there's a general mana curve that, has a bunch of 2s so that you actually have an early game, gets some 3s and 4s, and at least tries to have around 5 late game cards that everybody really tries to aim for because that's what gets you the most success rate. But then as a result, you really go up against 3 different kinds of people in Arena. You go up against noobs who don't know how to draft, so they just lose on the first few matches. You go up against people who know what they're doing, but didn't get a great draft. So you take those guys out around the 3rd or the 4th, maybe the 5th win. And then you have the people who are lucky enough to get the ridiculous stacks with 5 Azure Drakes and 10 True Silver Champions that just basically win because they have more stat value on their cards. Now, it's not that there's no uncertainty in the game, there certainly is, because you never know exactly what your opponent's holding in their hand. But as far as making the game entertaining, I think it would be better for everybody if there were a lot of different kinds of card combinations that you could really play and actually put up a fight against the top tier decks. Now, I think it will be the case, but here's hoping that in Goblins vs. Gnomes there is a true variety of cards that people can really play around with, a lot of time to figure out the new meta, and then a lot of ways to break the new meta that people come up with, as well as more variety in the games that people play in Arena mode, instead of just Sea Giant, Flame Strike, True Silver. I've been Darkskeleton. If you have any comments to share, feel free to leave them down below. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you all next time.